Okay, so what is called Da-sein, and how is Da-sein to be differentiated from the soul? Um, Also, some theory of personality. So, primarily, um, Da-sein is a name which Heidegger must bring in because he has repudiated, in a certain sense, Aristotle. The word repudiation can't be taken straightforwardly because Heidegger always speaks of Da-sein Andersetzung, or which has the word other in it. So confrontation, or coming to grips with the other, under the theory that the only way we have access to philosophy, which is another name in Heidegger for metaphysics, which um, Heidegger gives in short determination as theory of the object, which would, however, require further steps to clarify what does object mean. Um, Basically, object has to do with the Greek practice of sending envoys out to witness the displays of religious displays concerning specific gods of other countries and other peoples. Such displays one can still see, I believe, in full force in India and in some other places. Um, so, for example, in the beginning of the Politeia or the Republic, there's a display of which comes from a neighboring country of Thrace, comes from the Thracians. It can be differentiated from the Hellenes or the Greeks, and they have a god called Bendis, who is important for Heidegger so far as Bendis is identified with Artemis, and Artemis is the sister of Apollo. Artemis is identified with the forest and the forest Weg, forest way, and the Lichtung, or the lighting, the opening of Da-sein. So this opening we can represent linguistically with that dash or line between Da, which means there, and Sein, which means being. The latter term, we must clarify, becomes necessary to Heidegger because he moves away from Aristotle, from Aristotelian understanding, and ultimately from Socratic understanding, which has to do with theory of the object. Heidegger will often tell us that the Greeks are prior to the subject-object split, but there he refers to exactly to the Cartesian subject-object split, but there's already a more primary split, which is happening when the theorist, or the theoretician, or the one who stands back and gazes on the pure eternity, on the things which don't change, and calls those knowledge. So we can recall that Nietzsche is, in the first paragraph of his Truth and Lies in an Extramoral Sense, is following the practice that he learned from Leopardi to make fairy tales, and saying we could understand our highest understanding of what we are as beings, as a myth or a fairy tale. The human beings have invented knowledge, where knowledge is something one step above clever animals. We know that crows and other clever animals can do all kinds of feats of thinking, but they haven't invented knowledge. Knowledge has to do with the claim that aside from each individual object we come across, say a tree, the ones we actually come across in the Zuhandenheit, in the two-hand, our instinctual environmental life, or which in Aristotelian terms, in second nature, so-called, becomes our habitual life, our customary life. That this can be contrasted with the Vorhandenheit, which is the spirit of the Theorist, who can see a tree proper. So why is it impossible that we actually see in our environmental world a tree? So it's for the same reason that that we cannot see a triangle. We always see an obtuse triangle, which is to say a triangle which has a fat angle, a large angle, suggesting that the thing, if we tag that onto our vision, we could say the obtuse is when something's very close to us. We have an obtuse angle coming out from our eyes towards the object because it's very close. If it's very far, we have a very acute angle that goes towards the vanishing point. We never encounter a triangle which is simply a triangle. There's equilateral triangles which are neither obtuse or acute, but there's no triangle which doesn't, without characteristics, as it were. There's no man without qualities. In the same way, there's no tree simple. So there's some space that's cast off, which is in Plato, the eidos, the one of his theories of the eidos. There's something which isn't there for vision. Heidegger makes a modification of this and comes to say being is thrown over and against being. But here we're not dealing with a soul which has within it access to nous or to a high faculty of thinking, a soul which, as the philosopher the brother of the novelist who wrote The Golden Bough says in his work on the rise of the idea of consciousness in the Anglosphere, that the soul, all kinds of things happen to the soul. So the soul is, we want to identify here in our first step with personality. And Nietzsche is criticizing this in Beyond Good and Evil. The soul is like the self, so far as the self names are willing, our ability to, are willing, as we say, I will to speak now, or our thinking in the sense that you pause and you think something over, our feeling in the sense that we have impulses to do things, that these all come together in one figure called the personality or the self, or the suke, when this is understood as the life in contradistinction to the outward behavioral movement. Being, when we speak of the ontological difference, being as over against beings, is this space of the unseen, which seems, Heidegger analogizes it with right and left. We're always already operating within right or left, and it doesn't seem to be something added on, like a claim like a theory about what I was just saying, that human beings see by virtue of doing some geometry where the acute angle over against the obtuse angle can tell you how far something is away from you, because we actually just see. We don't go through those operations. They're not necessary to us. So the personality is something I want to go into, a theory of the personality. This is very important subject matter, because the personality goes along with what we're more accustomed to call moral conscience. But in Plato, this is the idea, eidos. Eidos, all the ideas are attempts to move away from the viciousness that Plato sees in the theoi, or the gods, and prescribe to them a certain content. So we have to show how the rise of the idea comes out of the theoi, as in Plato's Euthyphro dialogue, and show what personality means directly in human beings that are currently alive, and show how this goes along with the thinking of the Olympian gods, how it matches that organically. And why the thinking of Da-sein pushes this situation of the whole tradition of how we've been thinking since the beginning, which begins with the special Western among the Hellenes, probably before the philosophers got their hand on it. It was already in motion like a tradition, and then they got their hands on it and modified it according to the presence to hand, or the forehandedheit. There was phusis, and then there was the eidos. Phusis, what comes forward of its own, and eidos, the look of things, which catches it for the human being. So I remind the listener that the special Western idea of phusis, which we call nature, is clearly not. We can show historically when China came into, when what we now call China came into contact with this idea, and that it's obviously, even though one of its meaning is identical to what's known in the East, like when Hakuzai, for instance, speaks of the spirit of mountains, of trees, of birds. Of course,